evening, everybody, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar just before the Diwali week. I'm pretty sure all of you would be waiting for the holiday, and nobody would want to hear this, beyond the point. So we'll sort of keep it very crisp and simple. Uh, Chintan, you want to go to the presentation mode?
Yes.
So as you would all be aware that in 2017, when GST was being implemented, the design of GST was that there was supposed to be a GSTR 1, a GSTR 2, and a GSTR 3. The manner in which the functionality was to work is that a supplier will file a GSTR 1, a GSTR 2 would then get filed, and finally there was a GSTR 3 which was contemplated, and there was an entire mechanism which was proposed for accepting invoices, rejecting invoices, etc. What happened was the provisions never got implemented or introduced, and what followed suit was an enormous amount of litigation on reconciliation. There were for 17, 18, 18, 19 clarifications were issued to say that, sorry, I'm just getting a feedback that the volume is too low, so let me come closer to my screen. Sorry, hopefully I'm more audible now. So so what happened was that there was a spate of litigations which ensued, whereby so for 2017, 18, 18, 19, the government issued a clarification to say that reconciliation is not critical. The reconciliation is a requirement. However, that does not deny you credit. Now, when GST audit started, of course, this circular was disregarded, and the authorities started getting into, whether your credits are getting matched, etc., which created a huge amount of demand, and from mainly from a recipient perspective, where the authorities started alleging whether you are entitled to take credit or not, supplier has not paid the tax. Now, the various reconciliation notices were on account of multiple factors. So, of course, one of them were, where a fake invoice issue is involved. Either there is no supply, or let's say there is a supply, but the invoice has been taken from a third party. There were transactions also of circular trading. What IMS, the invoice, the new proposal which is there, the invoice management system, what it intends to do is it is not there for addressing 1, 2, or 4. What it is there is for addressing only serial number 3 on my slide, which is where there is a genuine invoice which has been issued. However, there is still a mismatch. Now, the mismatch could be that the supplier might have issued the invoice, however, might have not filed the returns. Like there are many instances where supplier is not able to file the return because he might have not received the money from its customers, thereby an inability to pay the required amount of tax which is shown in the returns. Or there could be errors where there would have been a wrong reporting to a wrong GSTN, or let's say the supplier recipient details are, some of the other details are incorrect. So what IMS is intended to do is it's a very proactive measure. And why this measure was introduced, we were a part of multiple meetings in ASSOCHAM where the industries actually sort of came out to say 1, 2, and 3 was the best mechanism. And that is where the government actually sort of heard the industry participant to introduce some form of 1, 2, and 3, which is the IMS. What's the objective of IMS? As we just stated it on the slide. The idea is that you get a pre-information about the invoices that are being issued by the supplier. You as a recipient have the ability to accept, reject, or keep the invoices pending. So let us say, for example, and Chintan will take you through the detailed process, but let me just give you a very brief synopsis of how it works. Is let us say on the second, somebody raises a e-invoice, and we are talking primarily year of the e-invoice. Cases which are out of the e-invoice doesn't sort of get covered over here, and those would still be manual. So on the second, let's say somebody issues a e-invoice. The moment he reports it on the e-invoice, you will see an entry in the IMS because a invoice gets reported. The moment the entry comes into the IMS, now unfortunately today the supplier's view is not enabled. But let's say tomorrow and the supplier view has to be enabled for this to work in the first place. So let's say tomorrow a supplier's view gets enabled. So the moment a supplier files an invoice, a recipient will see the invoice in its IMS. See, recipient has this option of either accepting, rejecting the invoice, or keep it pending. Now, what benefit is it to the recipient is that the recipient can take proactive steps in case of there are challenges, issues, amounts. Sometimes there is a wrong reporting, the invoice doesn't belong to the recipient. He can immediately sort of, take action on that invoice. The moment he takes action on the invoice, the supplier also can take proactive measures in terms of rectifying that error. So the entire objective is sort of to handle this aspect. But let me also give you a flip side of this. So this is not the first time that India has introduced IMS. IMS has been introduced in other countries as well in the past. And what generally happens is that because of the volumes involved, you see large corporate which have lakhs and lakhs of invoices. Whether it would be practical to every day go and see which invoices come and which has not come manually, right? Now, one is, of course, you introduce some kind of an automation in place, but whether companies would go and see invoices manually, accept, reject, and deliberate it on an everyday basis is still a very big open question mark. So at this moment, and I'm not sort of saying that IMS is not important, but I'm just saying is that at this moment, whomever we speak to, at least large corporate, what they're saying is we do not have the bandwidth to manage IMS. But having said that, let me also tell you, while at currently IMS is introduced as optional, there is a very clear objective of the government to make IMS mandatory. This is no more going to be optional. Number two is that today, while there is a facilitation to say that if I don't take action, it will automatically become all a part of to be, and therefore it is life as usual, right? Because everything today also comes in to be. But the moment it becomes mandatory, I don't think so. This will be the scenario, and therefore it is important that everybody starts sort of gearing up and preparing to IMS. I would now hand over to Chintan to take you through certain detailing of IMS, and I will, of course, chip in wherever there are some key concerns around IMS. Chintan, why don't you just take the discussion forward?
Sure. Thank you, Ritesh, and thank you, everyone. A very good evening, and thank you for joining us during the happy hours. So, the IMS functionality has been introduced from 1st October, and it is available for the taxpayers, basically the recipients for the time being, to view it on the GST dashboard. Now, when one says that it has been implemented from October, it means that the invoices generated during October, or let's say the invoices of past dates or past periods, but reported in October, would be available in the IMS dashboard. And as Ritesh rightly mentioned, a supplier view is still under development, but it would be available sooner or later. So before going into the updated GSTR 3B flow, what is happening presently is that there is a GSTR 2B which is generated every month on 14th, and the recipient can see that statement showing the invoices, the credit note, debit notes, etc. But the recipient has no ability to take any kind of actions on what is being reported. So whether it is right, wrong, not relevant, relevant, there is no control by the recipient. The IMS functionality basically tries to take away this limitation. So from now onwards, from after implementation of IMS, all the e-invoices which are being generated, that would be available in the IMS on a real-time basis. And also those invoices which are saved by the supplier, that would also be available in the IMS of the recipient. The recipient would basically have three options: either accept the invoice or reject the invoice, or if he is not sure about the underlying document, he can keep it pending. But if no action is taken, it is deemed to be accepted. Like whatever is mentioned in the IMS, that would be accepted and will form part of draft GSTR 2. So on 14th of every month, a draft GSTR 2B will be generated. And of course, this would not be a static, it would be a flexible one. From 14 to 20, the recipient would have the ability to take any kind of actions on the invoices, credit note, etc. reported. And after taking actions, the recipient would have the ability to generate a GSTR 2B and thereafter file the GSTR 3B. Once the GSTR 3B is filed, the 2B which is generated will become static, and then no actions could be taken once the 3B is filed. So coming to the next slide, how would the IMS workflow would look? How is this IMS dashboard placed? So it's available under the returns menu, and it has been kept outside, fairly visible, the IMS dashboard. In fact, interestingly, when it was introduced on the very first day, that was not visible. It was inside the return dashboard. One had to select the respective tax period, go to 2B, and then it was visible. But fortunately, GSTN acted quickly and brought it to outside in the returns menu. So in the IMS dashboard, there would be two types of uh, dashboard. One is for the inward supplies and one which is for the recipient. And one is the outward supply dashboard. The supplies dashboard is yet not functional, but this is what it would look like. Once you click on the inward supplies dashboard, you will be able to see the B2B invoices, the amendments, if any. Similarly, the debit note, credit note, and the invoices issued by the e-commerce operator. So basically, this will give you a summary of how many invoices have been generated, or rather, how many records are available, whether it is accepted, rejected, or kept pending. Once you click on any of this, let's say if you click on the B2B invoices, you will be able to see whatever has been furnished by the supplier. You will be able to see the supplier's name, the GST and the invoice number, the type of invoice, whether invoice, credit note, etc. And you will also have this facility to accept, reject, or keep the record pending. Similarly, you would also have this facility to download the whole dashboard in Excel. So there is a download Excel option provided. So if there is a bulk of data which is there in the IMS, you can easily export it and take relevant actions. There is also a search functionality available, like if you want to search by a GSTN of a supplier, or by, let's say, a name, or by invoice number, that facility is also available in the dashboard. Similarly, there is also this filter facility where you can filter by the GSTN, you can filter by the type of invoice, you can filter by the status, whether it is filed or it is in a draft stage, and the source, whether it is GSTR 1, etc., or IFF. The IMS dashboard also provides a functionality of bulk action. So on the screen, if you can see, generally 10 records per page are displayed. So you have the option to either select 10 records, or you can even go a step ahead and select all the records. It may be in hundreds, thousands, etc. And you can take a bulk action, whether you want to simultaneously accept all the invoice, reject, or keep it pending. So that flexibility is available.
Like to just make a comment.
Yes.
See, the biggest problem today is that every month large corporate would have invoices which would be in lakhs, right? Now, I'm pretty sure that people would have implemented a reconciliation process, correct? Which is technology-driven reconciliation process. I think what would be important is that how does IMS gets integrated with that entire technology process? Because even a bulk action, for example, cannot be manual, right? Nobody would have the ability to browse through 10 line items, which means, let's say I have, for this month itself, let's say I have, let's say 25,000 line items, right? So
Yes.
it will at least take a month only for you to browse through those line items, because you would of course be checking those invoices. So my view is that ultimately the way IMS would function is that it would get integrated with your reconciliation tool, and the bulk acceptance would be through the probably the ASP, who would, wherever there's a complete match, they would just simpliciter do a bulk selection automatically, and then the users would be left to look at items which are not pending, no, those multiple baskets, to say, uh, complete mismatch, or let's say, for example, most likely match, etc. So that is the sense that, in our view, how this entire IMS would be sort of functioning.
Absolutely. So I think for the taxpayers who have limited records every month, yes, the portal would be helpful. But as you rightly mentioned, if there are bulks and bulks of record, uh, it would be inevitable to have some kind of a reconciliation tool or integration with the system to take actions.
And I was just reading one question. So, while today there would not be any opportunities in terms of, downloading and uploading, but see, as the GST system would evolve and as this functionality will become more popular, you would of course see even an API integration more getting introduced. So it's a matter of time, and therefore the government has right now kept this as optional.
Absolutely. So moving on to the next point in the dashboard is the facility of resetting of records. So for example, if you have accepted any invoice and then you decide that you want to keep it as pending or maybe even reject, you have this facility of resetting the record. So basically you just have to select whatsoever the invoice is, click on reset, and the portal will reset it to uh, uh, the reset the action which you have taken. Of course, this can be done only before filing of 3B. Once the 3B is filed, there is no such facility. This we discussed that you can download the entire IMS in Excel. Uh, so once you have made your choices in the IMS, accept, reject, etc., you would be able to see a summary of all the actions that have been taken on the number of invoices, and thereafter, the next step is to click on compute GSTR2. Once it is done and once you compute the GSTR 2B, the amounts which have been accepted, rejected, etc., that flows to GSTR 3B. Basically, your ITC amount which will flow to GSTR 3B, that will become the final one. And once the 3B is filed, this 2B will become a static statement as to what action has been taken by you for the respective period. So this is how the IMS dashboard would work. And there is also this outward supplies window. It is yet not functional, but maybe we can just briefly discuss as to how this would look. So on clicking of outward supplies, you would get the option of selecting the period and the relevant tax period, relevant month. And once you go ahead, you would get all the tables which are available in GSTR1. So 4A, 4B, which are for the outward supply invoices, the credit note, debit note, etc. And once you click on it, you will be able to see what action has been taken by the recipient, whether he has accepted, rejected, or there is no action, etc. That would be visible. But this is the limited information which is available right now, and we would have to see how the outward supplies IMS would look. So this was about the dashboard that is available right now. The GSTN has also issued some of the important FAQs, and we can just go through them one by one. And so the first one is what are the documents that will not be available in IMS? So as we discussed, there are basically three type of records that can be on which the action can be taken, which is the invoice, credit note, debit notes. But the items like, let's say, the records flowing from a supplier who is an NRTP, non-resident taxable person, or the registered person is an ISD, input service distributor. There is no facility to take any kind of action in IMS for these two category of invoices. Similarly, the IceGate document, basically your bill of entry, these documents will not flow to your IMS. Of course, these documents will directly go to your GSTR 2B, but as of now, there is no facility to take any kind of action on these records. Similarly, the output RCM record. So, for example, if there is an advocate firm who is registered under GST, they are required to file their GST returns. They have to show the invoice in GSTR1, but the recipient will not be able to take any kind of action on this. Similarly, the documents, the invoices where because of the POS, the place of supply restriction, the ITC is ineligible, or because of the time limit, the ITC is not eligible, that will not flow to IMS. It will directly go to your GSTR 2B under ineligible category. The last is the documents where ITC is required to be reversed under Rule 37A, which is basically because of non-payment of tax by the supplier. This will not flow to your IMS. The next question is regarding the number of times an action can be
Chintan, I
taken by.
just wanted
Yes.
to make a point
Yes.
on A. See, if you see these items from 1 to 5, they're all logical points, because in most of these cases, except I'll come to 4, in most of these cases, the credit is not dependent upon an acceptance by the recipient. So there is no disallowance under Section 16, like import documents, for example. The credit is available irrespective of, supplier is not involved at all. Similarly, your RCM, where you yourself pay tax, right? There is no question of acceptance. I think the larger issue that I see is ineligibility due to POS, specifically where, let's say, the supplier has done an error in reporting the POS. And there is something where I would not have the benefit of correcting those invoices through the IMS functionality. Now, what could this cover? So, for example, let's say hotel, which is a immovable property, and the hotel guy has issued an IGST invoice. Now, first is, how would the system sort of come to know that the POS is incorrect? Or let's say there could be a wrong reporting of POS for some reason, and the system is able to identify it. So there is a mismatch between the tax reported and let's say, the state code. So the only challenge that I see over here is that those kind of invoices will not come in your IMS, and you would not have that benefit, which otherwise would be available for all. So in our view, those should have come in IMS at least. And of course, the recipient will then reject those invoices. That should have been the proper approach. 16.4, yes, the timelines, if the invoice is beyond a particular time period, the credit is not available. So while rest of it is logical, I think the POS piece seems to be a bit of a question mark.
Yes. So the next question is regarding the number of time an action could be taken on any kind of invoice or a record. So there is no restriction in the IMS portal. You can take action multiple times till the time you compute your 2B and file the GSTR 3B. And whatever is the last action that you take, that would be considered. The previous ones would be ignored. Now, coming to the next two question is regarding the amendment of invoice. So let's say the supplier has issued an invoice, let's say on 2nd, and if he wants to make an amendment on, let's say, before filing of GSTR 1, then in the IMS system, the original invoice will get replaced by the amendment one. And even if the recipient has taken an action on the original record, that would be disregarded, and the recipient would be required to take action on the revised or the amended invoice. Now, let's say if the supplier makes amendment of the invoice after filing of GSTR 1. In that case, the differential amount, which is called the delta, whether increase or decrease, that will flow to the 2B of the subsequent period. So let's say if in this month there is in the original invoice, there is a ITC of 100 rupees, and that has been reduced to now 80. So the delta is 20. So this reduction in ITC of 20 will go in the IMS in the subsequent period, Now, what happens if I think the next point is already covered, whether the action is taken in the same 2B period or the different period. We can move on to the next one. So as mentioned earlier, there are 3 types of actions that are available, which is accept, reject, and pending. But there are certain documents on which it is mandatory to take action. The option or the facility of keeping it pending, that's not available in the IMS. So which are these documents? These are the documents like original credit note, if there is an upward amendment of the credit note, irrespective of any kind of action taken by the recipient, then there is this downward amendment in the credit note, and the downward amendment of invoice or debit note, where the original invoice or debit note was accepted by. So basically, all those amendments which results in a reduction of liability of the supplier, uh, on which there is this facility of pending is not available. So this is what has been clarified by in the subsequent FAQ as well, that since the outward supply, the supplier has reduced his outward tax liability, it is essential that an action is taken by the recipient.
Sorry, just one point while we have covered that separately, Chintan, because we are
Yes.
discussing credit note and the action of pending, I think it is important to highlight this point. See, we have seen multiple situations where a tax invoice is issued, and before the tax invoice could even reach the recipient, a credit note is issued. So the recipient would neither have the tax invoice nor will he have the credit note. And let us take a situation where recipient rejects the invoice for some reason. Right now, if the recipient rejects the invoice, that doesn't mean the tax liability of the supplier comes down. That is not the impact. But let's say there is a credit note and he rejects the credit note because he can't keep it pending. So invoice, let's say the recipient has kept it pending because he's not sure about that invoice. He would have not even booked that invoice because the invoice would have not come to him. So he would have thought it might be lying somewhere in somebody's drawer. So the tax liability of the supplier gets created. A credit note is not sent to the recipient because the invoice was issued by error. And this is a very usual business practice, right? We create invoices and we create credit notes in bulk without even thinking about the repercussions. So the credit note is also not sent, the invoice is not sent. So what is the consequence? The credit note will get flashed in the IMS. The recipient will have no option but to either accept it or reject it. Now, if he does not take action deemed to be accepted, so which means that he will do a bulk select and reject those credit notes. So the supplier has reported his tax liability and the recipient has rejected the credit note. So there is a dual impact because the moment recipient rejects the credit note, which means that the tax liability of the supplier does not get reduced. So of course, today the supplier can go and manually correct 3B, but that will lead to a maybe a scrutiny or an investigation in terms of, look, I have issued the credit note, but the recipient has rejected because there is also a condition, right, that the recipient needs to reverse credit from a credit note. So in that situation, if the recipient has rejected the credit note, then clearly all my credit note will start getting disallowed as a supplier. This is a huge issue which I think has not been thought through very well, specifically considering that invoices and credit notes may not be even sent to the recipient and he might not even booked any of those. So I don't know how this is going to play out, but I just thought it is a very important point that while this is also mentioned subsequently in the site, but it deserved mentioning it over here. Yeah, Chintan, go ahead.
Absolutely. And in fact, Ritesh, from January, there would be a hard locking of the 3B, like whatever is populated in the GSTR one would be reflected in 3B. So I guess even that facility of amending the figures, that would also be taken away. So
My experience, Chintan, says that the hard locking will get postponed for some time. I don't think so. Industry is ready for that right now. But
absolutely.
let's see how it evolves. And of course, today this entire IMS is optional, right?
Hmm.
So I may just there could be a deemed acceptance of everything. So let's see how it plays out.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to the next FAQ as to what happens if the recipient rejects a record. So as long as recipient rejects it before the GSTR one is filed by the supplier has the ability to resubmit or with the same details or with amended details, and this will again be reflected in the recipient's IMS dashboard. If the recipient rejects it after the filing of GSTR one, again we have this facility of filing records or amending the records in GSTR one in the same tax period, as well as this can be done in the subsequent periods GSTR1. The next FAQ, I think we already just discussed, so not going again. Now, this question is regarding a genuine credit note, which was issued by the supplier. So basically, if the recipient has received an invoice and he has reversed the ITC because of non-eligibility or because it is related to an exempt supplier or because of the POS issue. Now, this credit note is again reflected in its IMS. So, what to do? Whether to accept it or reject it. So, if this is rejected, the supplier's liability does not get reduced and it raises complication. But at the same time, if it is accepted, the recipient's ITC would get reduced. So the FAQ clarifies that there is no need to reverse it again. So basically, it suggests that while filing your GSTR 3B, you can manually just increase the amount. Of course, this will result in a mismatch between what is being reported in your GSTR 2B and 3B. But this FAQ will help in future. So the next question is what should be done if wrong invoice is corrected by issuance of a credit note by the supplier instead of amending the same? There is no linkage of credit note with the original invoice. So system really cannot track whether the credit note is pertaining to original invoice or not and whether it was rejected or not. So the FAQ recommends that one could simply rectify the original invoice through GSTR1. Now, this also raises a question which is not answered as to what if someone has followed this method and the recipient has inadvertently rejected the amended record as well. This will again create a liability on the supplier. So, I think this is a situation which is evolving and that needs to be seen how the functionality develops. The next question is whether if the recipient rejects the uh, a credit note, whether the liability on the supplier would be added in the same tax period or the next tax period. The answer is that it will be dealt with in the next GST return and not the same one. The next question is regarding, let's say if you are in the month of November filing the returns for October and you have inadvertently rejected an invoice in the IMS. So there is this option of resetting your choices. Yeah, you can reset your actions as long as the 3B is not filed. But if the 3B is filed, there is per se no option to make any kind of rectifications.
One point I want to highlight over here is that we are here not talking about one or two invoices. So you just need to be mindful that here we are talking about multiples and multiples of invoices. So
Yes.
how is it going to, sort of pan out? So just an anecdote that would a user open the IMS and look into each and every invoice and understand the FAQs relevant to each and every invoice and then accept reject. I really don't know how this is going to sort of function. And I'm just putting
Correct.
a thought process that, you know, when it goes live, let's see what are users ready to do and not to do.
I think the users should be very careful while selecting the reject option. I think it should be the last resort of rejecting the invoice or credit note, whatsoever it is.
Just one
Yes.
point is for credit note, there may not be any choice because if let's say
Hmm.
a recipient would have not received the invoice per se, right? And there
Correct.
is a credit note which suddenly comes to him, he cannot accept it, right?
Yes.
Which means that the only choice for him is so invoice A, I understand you can keep it pending for eternity. But see again, if that invoice actually belongs to you, the consequence of accepting is what? That it becomes a part of your to be. Right. So if you do not accept, let's say, and it doesn't go into 2B today, while you can manually change the 2B figures, but I'm pretty sure authorities would take this as an opportunity to, pick up your IMS and 2B to say that, look, boss, you've not even accepted it. How there is now there's a new mismatch between your IMS and 2B
Hmm.
creates an entirely set of issues. So So I'm not very sure whether, so keep it. So if you don't reject it, of course, you have to accept it, right? As you said, ki last option. And if you don't want to accept it, then you have to keep it pending, right? And let's say if keep it pending is the last option, which means that your 2B is impacted, which means that you could have even a now RICO show cause notice between IMS and 2B. And we'll come to the legality of this entire thing. But then the point is, we don't know what is the last option, whether it is pending is the last option, rejection is the last option, or accepting is the last option. Because I don't see
Absolutely.
any of it to be an option in specific circumstance. Anything could be the last option.
In fact, even commercially speaking, if you keep the invoices pending, that impacts your working capital.
Absolutely.
So,
And today the way processes work, right? That today an invoice goes to a client and it doesn't get booked for 3 4 months. It's a process, right? So there is no question of it getting recorded, forget about, and nobody would want to take credit before recording the invoice in its books. So it may just keep lying in the IMS, and if I don't take action, it comes in 3B. But let's say if I take an action, uh, so the option is of course pending. And yes, here I would say that because he's not even booked on his accounting system, so it doesn't matter. The working capital issue may not come into play.
these were the certain FAQs that were issued by GST, and now what are the challenges that would pose on the taxpayers because of this IMS? First is about the legality, like whether this system per se, also although it is optional, whether the law prescribes any provisions. The answer is no. The law or the rules, GST rules, do not prescribe any kind of procedure of such sort.
So let me clarify this, Chintan, a bit. So let us take a situation where you have rejected an invoice and it doesn't go into your 2B, right? Now 2B is important for you to take credit, right? Today the law is very clear that until and unless an invoice doesn't come in 2B, you're not entitled. So you've rejected an invoice by error, let us say, and it goes in your 2B. It doesn't go in your 2B. Can I then go and take that credit in 3B, and can there be a show cause notice? Because IMS has no legal sanctity. Then how can my rejection in IMS lead to my denial of credit or non-reporting of invoice in 2B? I think till this entire procedure is introduced formally, right? And to my sense, if they say it is optional, which means that the only option is accept all. So the best preferred option is accept all, move on with life, because let it be in 2B. If you don't take the credit, I have an argument, I have not taken credit. Where is the challenge? But the moment you take an action of acceptance or rejection, and acceptance could also be used as a allegation against you that you yourself have accepted. A rejection could be used as an allegation against you to say that you yourself has rejected. And so we do see that tomorrow if somebody issues a notice, somebody takes a manual credit, and let's say department issues the show cause notice that it is not in 2B, this would go to a writ court for sure. It would be challenged to say that the provisions, the entire IMS mechanism has no legal standing, and the government ought not to have created this process where it sort of comes or defines my 2B. They should maybe would have kept it aside and create another document, but changing my 2B is going to create some issue over here.
Absolutely. And in fact, on the rejection part, at least the IMS system should have been such that even if it is rejected, I have the ability to reclaim it. At least there is a time limit of taking the ITC, which is like 30th November.
So which you can, Chintan, because a supplier has an option to again present the same
Correct.
or with amendments. So that option is there. But the point that I'm trying to make is that for some reason, let's say, for example, I have rejected it. Supplier's liability is not reduced. Let's say I am a very proactive recipient. I look at each and every invoice. Supplier is gone by the normal process of accept all. He doesn't bother about acceptance and rejection. So here is a situation where you have rejected, your 2B is gone, and then the invoice doesn't come to you again, right? In the next month's 2B, right? He is not re-reported it. So there I see some kind of challenges in terms of it not being in your 2B whether you can be denied credit based on IMS? Legal answer is no.
So the IMS system also poses a challenge of reconciliation and amendments. So in the IMS, since the invoices are getting reported on a real-time basis, so for example, if an invoice is raised on second, you can actually view that invoice in your IMS on second, and let's say you take an action. But on let's say 10th, the supplier takes another action, makes some changes. So the previous action gets discarded, and you are again required to take an action on the amended record. So this creates a lot of hassles of taking actions multiple times on the same record or same or similar record again and again. So if there are bulk of invoices, or let's say if there are certain suppliers who have this tendency, or the recipient who have certain inward supplies where the amendments are inevitable. I think for those kind of taxpayers, it is like it would be advisable to take actions only after the GSTR ones are filed by the suppliers and not before that. Otherwise, it's a constant loop of taking actions on the same kind of. The another challenge that the taxpayers would face is the additional reconciliation. So IMS reflects the invoices, credit notes, and debit note, but uh, the records related to your bill of entry, the IST, the output RCM, etc., are automatically populated in your 2B. So while the IMS takes care of reconciliation of this invoices and credit notes, but it does not take care of the reconciliation of these other documents. Hence, at the end of month or at the end of generation of your 2B, you would require to take a reconciliation of all these documents. Another challenge this IMS system poses is that so far there is no report or there is no tracking of what kind of actions that you have taken. Like let's say if you accept the invoices, yes, it is reflected in 2B, but if it is rejected, uh, this will just disappear from the IMS. So an audit trail of a sort as to whether the user has accepted, rejected, or deemed accepted, that's not available in the system as of now.
With the only rider that your ASP might create that report.
Yes.
Because typically most of the corporates would be using some kind of an ASP. And the moment you use an ASP, which means that there will be some kind of a report which will be created by an ASP. That is likely to be the scenario.
Correct. And the last one is we have discussed in detail about the consequences of credit notes being rejected. So to summarize, we have just listed some pros and a lot of cons which are there in the IMS system. The pros is that, or rather, the advantage of IMS is that the invoices are reported on a real-time basis. So the recipient can always take immediate actions on whatsoever is being reflected in the IMS. The other advantage is that only the accepted invoices or credit notes would be reflected in your 2B. So there won't be any need of an additional reconciliation at the end of a particular tax period, or even an annual reconciliation would not be required between your books and your 2B and 3B. Theoretically, if this is followed, you could see a substantial reduction in the litigation which we are presently seeing with respect to the mismatch between the ITC taken in 3B versus 2B versus 2A. Coming to the disadvantages, some of, or rather most of them, we have already discussed that if the recipient rejects certain specified records like a credit note, it has a substantial impact on the supplier's tax liability. Furthermore, this functionality of not having the option to keep the credit note pending, that again impacts the supplier's liability. And let's say if the credit note is rejected, it creates a lot of procedural hassle, like someone has to then manually approach the supplier to take actions, etc. So this creates some of the few hassles because of the rejection. Till now, GSTR 2B was static. So on 14th of every month, you would be knowing that, okay, these are the invoices, credit note, etc. But now this statement will become dynamic, and till the time you file 3B, it will keep on changing. So you would have to constantly take actions and recompute 2B till the time you are confident that, okay, this is the right amount that needs to flow to GSTR 3B. Although the IMS system is optional, the no action is deemed as it is treated as deemed acceptance. Now, whether this deemed acceptance could be used against the taxpayer by the department, that is something which only the litigations in future would tell. Like the department can always argue that we have provided this facility to have a look at the invoices. So maybe the taxpayer will not have the ability to argue that I was not aware, or this was deemed or this was there in the GSTR 2B, wherein I had no control. So that is something that a legal development may happen in future. Uh, the next disadvantage is that there is no option to reset after filing your 3B. So, for example, if you have rejected your invoice in a particular month, but later on realize that it was supposed to be accepted, there is no facility to simply reset the rejection choice. Someone would have to again approach the supplier to make necessary changes, but there is no automatic reset facility. Another challenge is that IMS increase a lot of compliance burden, and of course it entails a technology cost. Like if you have bulks of invoices and if you really want to implement this IMS system, you would have to make amendments in your system, develop or enhance your reconciliation tools, etc., which results in increase in the technology cost. And like if this is not rigorously followed, you can always expect a litigation, a mismatch of sorts. The last point is regarding the mismatch with the accounts. Like practically, it is difficult that the invoices which are generated reaches to the accounts team on a regular basis. It so happens that invoices are just lying there with the employees and maybe even lying in the drawer, and it does not reach to the accounts team. It reaches later on. So a person would always have to keep reconciliation with your books of account also. Until that time, you would have to keep the invoices pending until you get the actual invoice. So whether this IMS is practical, a boon, or a curse, I think a time will only tell. So I think that was it.
One point
Yes.
that just I want to highlight is that, see, maybe this is how things are going to work going forward. Uh, one will have to look at it positively, because today people are faced with a lot of litigations around reconciliation. And the entire reconciliation issue, and I'm talking about genuine invoices. There's no point in talking about fake invoices. We're not here to address fake invoice. I mean to say genuine fake invoice. Let me put it this way. We are here to address only genuine invoice, where a lot of credit actually sort of gets denied because of small errors, small issues, etc. Maybe this is an opportunity to sort of, relook at those invoices at the first instance rather than waiting for the 14th, because between a 14th and a 20th also there is a very little time limit. Of course, it enhances the effort considerably, because you will have to sit, somebody will have to look at it every day. Now, one approach which could be done is that it is made a part of your entire accounts payable process, account booking and account payable process. Because let us say, for example, if somebody is booking an invoice, and this could be after, let's say, 2 3 months, right? And let's say where there is no clarity, the invoice has been kept in pending. One part of my account booking process is that the invoice is there in IMS. and the user books, and as a part of the process, let's say goes and accepts it, which means that I don't even have to worry about the payment then, because then payment will be made automatically once the invoice is booked. Because today many corporates are following this approach that till my GST, my invoice is not reported, right? And the invoice is not reflected in 2B, I don't make payment to them. That is being tracked. Now that is being tracked automatically. Going forward, maybe as a part of your entire accounts payable process, this is like, as my invoice come in IMS, yes, then I will accept it and I will book the invoice. That becomes a part of, till the point in time it becomes a part of the process. It's going to be extremely difficult to follow IMS. I don't think so. A post reconciliation is ever going to happen in any organization. That's my sort of broad take on the entire IMS functionality which is getting introduced. It is like a bank reconciliation, right? Which you have to do it on a very regular basis to see whether my payments have come or not. This will have to be, incorporated in that sense, that whether my invoice has come or not. And if it has come, then I will book it in the accounts. Otherwise, I'll not even book it in the account. It is as simple as that. If there are any questions, happy to take. I was just reading the Q&A section, and one of the questions says keeping an invoice pending is also considered as an action. Everything is considered as an action in IMS. Whether you accept, it's an action. Whether you reject, it's an action. Whether you keep it pending also, it's an action. And whether you don't do anything also is an action, because that's a deemed action. So everything that you sort of do or don't do in IMS is an action. PPT, yes, it's been already informed earlier that the PPT will be sent across to everyone. If there are any further questions, happy to take it, or we can just end this session. So there was this one question in the chat box on what happened in the case of suppliers amend tax invoice in the next month. That's already been answered. It would be reported in the next month's 3B. So the delta will 2B, sorry, the delta will get reported, and you will have to then accept or reject that delta. Somebody is asking what is the benefit to the government. I would say it is benefit to the industry and not to the government. Government is least bothered. They will issue you a show cause notice and sit with the show cause notice for ages. This was an industry demand actually, not that something which government wanted to introduce. There was a 1, 2, 3 which was contemplated, and so industry started saying 1, 2, 3 was better. Of course, there would always be this situation that something was proposed to be introduced. First, you argue against it to say that no, this is not the right mechanism. It gets taken away, and then somebody is arguing to say that no, this was the right mechanism. So this will sort of everything would have its own pros and cons, and in your ecosystem, you will have to evaluate how does it work. You're absolutely right. A whole department is going to make this mandatory. That is the future objective. So it's better for everyone to sort of get up on it today itself. Because even department doesn't want to get into litigation, and they will then have an argument to say that, look, you only took an action. What can I do about it? The only one thing which would sort of come up on this action piece is again fraud suppression, because in a lot of such cases there is an argument to say that that you've taken credit fraudulently, etc. Tomorrow, if I accept the invoice for some reason, take the credit, would that argument sort of go away to say that no, I have not fraudulent, and of course I can still argue that I have not fraudulently taken the credit. According to me, this was the right invoice. But yes. 2A had become useless since 2B was issued. So uh, it's not useless today, but it's been useless for quite some time now. Though it gets generated, but I think gradually 2A would go away. Yes, there is a bulk acceptance in IMS, but imagine a situation where you have 50,000 invoices appearing on the screen. Will you bulk accept it? Answer is no. So you will need that functionality where there is a RICO carried out by some automated system, and then you do a bulk acceptance. Otherwise, bulk acceptance is just a option, nothing else. Template, Chintan, is there a template to upload acceptance today?
No, as of now, no.
Yeah, they would, but they would come out with a template for sure. And of course, ASPs would definitely come out with it. Yeah, block credit is out of IMS because the credits are. See, again, what is blocked credit? It's a matter of interpretation, right? So today, while the government comes out with its own view of what is blocked credit as part of 2B, right? 2B shows what is blocked credit, but today, as far as IMS is concerned, all the supplier invoices will get displayed. Then you will have to decide whether the credit is available or not. Chintan, how does it work, Chintan? Any idea of block credit? Would it today? My understanding is that in 2B you can see blocked credit, correct?
Yes, all the 75 credits are visible.
So the block credit invoices will also come in IMS, and then in 2B it will.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes,
So you will
correct.
have to still accept rejected. There is no corrective action available. There is a question from Sudhir. What will happen is that you will have to go back to the supplier, ask him to re-report that invoice, and then accept that invoice. So recipient cannot take any corrective action on the IMS. There is no option. If recipient has rejected it, it is at its own peril. And therefore, Chintan was saying rejection is the last option. Of course, this also doesn't go near 2B, huh? So it impacts your working capital also. While working capital also is not an issue because you would have not paid the supplier also. Take a situation where you have paid the supplier and then you've rejected. Yes, then it's an issue. I think there are no further questions. I think we can end the session.